Welcome to Adventures in Coffee, a podcast by Caffeine magazine sponsored by Oatly.
In this second series, Jules and I explore the world of coffee for those that are curious about what's in their daily cup.
Now, we are becoming more and more inquisitive about where our food and drink comes from. So we made this podcast to get you all frothed up about the creamy world of coffee.
I am Scott Bentley and I am the founder of Caffeine magazine. And I'm going to just own it, guys. I'm a coffee dork, yeah?
You dork proudly, Scott. You do. And I'm Jules Walker, a very proud East Londoner. And yes, I am that woman that you will see on a bike somewhere in East London riding to her favourite coffee shops.
Now, in today's episode, we're going back to our Adventures in Your Kitchen format.
We are going to be helping you, dear listener, on your journey towards becoming a latte art pro.
And we're going to help you steam that perfect milk, that wonderful texture, and then pour those perfectly symmetrical patterns. Or we're going to get you at least as close as we can.
Now, one of the really beautiful things about this, Scott, is that this episode, we're going to be taking our dear listener on this journey, and the fact that you won't need to have any fancy equipment whatsoever in your kitchen to be able to do this. It's literally the tools that you have right now are going to get you to that point to have that beautiful latte art. Now, one of the most essential things when it comes to making latte art is the milk. And of course, being able to froth it. So we are going to be speaking to Morgan Eckroft, also known as Morgan Drinks Coffee on all of the social media channels, who is going to give us the magic in our milk in regards to being able to froth it correctly and get it at that point where it's going to be pure magic to put into your coffee.
Absolutely. And then we're going to speak to Heidi Philip-Smith. She is an absolute legend when it comes to latte art here in the UK. And she'll help us figure out how to pour exceptional latte art once we've got that perfect milk.
But before we do that and take you on this very exciting journey, let's hear a quick word from our sponsor.
And here is a sustainability hack brought to you by Oatly. Sister Jules, it's been 2 weeks since my last kitchen sink confessional.
Tell me, my son, how have you sinned?
I'm not using a dishwasher.
Oh, Scott! I'm sorry, but I'm really disappointed in you. I mean, did you not see the Oatly sustainability hack, which told us that hand washing creates over double the amount of greenhouse gases as dishwashers? Now, Scott, if you convince 2 of your friends to invest in a dishwasher, across the 3 of you, you'd all end up saving over 10 tonnes of CO2 over 10 years.
But I don't get it. How is that? I mean, I'm doing all the bloody work here. Have you seen these guns?
Come on now. I'm sure you probably fancy yourself as the Daniel Craig of dishwashing, but it's actually the hot water, Scott.
Oh, okay. No, well, fair enough. Well, actually, Jules, according to these hacks, if you don't use the drying stage of your dishwasher, you can reduce the carbon footprint of that dishwasher by a further 11%. Have you done that?
Scott? What would you say if I said that I don't actually have a dishwasher either?
This sustainability hack was brought to you by Oatly.
I'm sorry.
Right, Jules, I hope this next bit's going to be good because, I mean, I've got an espresso machine at home. Mm-hmm. I've got a dedicated steam wand on that espresso machine. And it ain't that easy for me to make really, really good milk. I don't get it right every single time. So you think that we can do this without an espresso machine?
You absolutely can do this without fancy equipment in your kitchen, Scott, because I'm going to introduce you to a person who is going to blow your milky mind.
So my name is Morgan Eckroft. I've been a barista in the coffee world for about 4 years.
So Morgan is really well known on the coffee social media scene, and here is a backstory on her.
I started out at a local shop, and then after a while, I ended up jumping a little bit into the competition scene. I did some work in the United States Barista Championship, which was really fun. And then I decided I wanted to make internet videos. And they started to gain some traction, which I was like, oh, that's fun. Like, maybe I want to pursue that. I do Morgan Drinks Coffee full time now, which is a lot of fun.
You have a huge following. So it's like, what, 359,000 people following you on Instagram alone, which is incredible.
It's a ridiculous number when I think about it.
Definitely puts Caffeine mag to shame.
So, Scott, to make wonderful latte art at home, you don't need to have oodles of fancy machines or anything like that. And the likelihood is you've probably already got one of them in your home already. The humble and wonderful cafetiere, also known as the French press.
My very first YouTube videos I did specifically was how to do latte art at home without a machine. I leaned really heavily into like the French press method. Essentially, all you need to be doing for that frothy milk is you're introducing heat to it and you're introducing air to it. And when you have an espresso machine, you have a steam wand, it does both of those things simultaneously, which is great. That's definitely the easiest route. It's definitely going to give you the best product, but there's no reason you can't do those things separately and have a really similar result. So I always recommended people start out with French presses.
Now, Scott, I'm sure you already know this, but you need to have foamed milk in order to make latte art, right? But there's a very specific texture of foam that you need to get to in order to do this. And Morgan is going to talk us through what that is.
The thing I'll start out with when talking about, frothing milk at home is there's always a gold texture of your milk you're looking for, especially for latte art, for that really, really fine, like cafe grade. I'll use the word microfoam. It's kind of a strange word, but it's those really, really fine air bubbles you're introducing. That's really the key to that smooth, creamy milk we all associate with, like cappuccinos and lattes. And it's hard to get at home.
I've kind of seen this done on the internet. I've seen this done in videos, but I don't think it's really that possible. You need some proper guns to make this happen, or you've got to spend a long time doing this. I don't think this is a thing. I'm sorry. I'm calling BS on this.
No, I'm not having that. Allow me to take you back to the French press, which is what we're discussing here, because there is actually a very specific and very careful way you need to use it to achieve this. First things first, you got to get that milk to a specific temperature.
I always recommend people start off with milk that's between 57 to 63 degrees
Celsius, of course.
At that point, you're going to have nice warm milk that's going to maintain that heat for a while, but you're also not getting it to the point where it's going to split or go bitter or any of those things. Because the minute that happens, you got to toss it down the drain and start over again, because you're going to get those really bitter flavors, and it's burnt milk, and no one wants that. You can either do that on a stovetop or in a microwave. I've done both. The microwave, it feels like it's cheating, but it works really, really well. So I always tell people never be afraid of the microwave. It works great.
Okay, then, Scott, now you've got your milk to around 60 degrees Celsius.
After that, it goes into your French press, and then this is where kind of the tricky, it just takes a good amount of practice happens. So you have that plunger on top. You have that very, very, very fine mesh. And when you move that through the milk, up to the top of it and back down to the bottom, you're grabbing air and you're pushing it into the milk, which is creating that foam. But there's that fine line between adding too much air or adding too little, and that's kind of where the mess starts to happen. Some of the techniques that I found that work super well is doing very, very small movements. So you're bringing your plunger up to the top and then just a little bit under. It's a very delicate. It's not you're not plunging the entire French press over and over again.
Guilty.
Me too. No, this is many, many times trial and error here. But using those small movements will introduce smaller amounts of air, which gives you something very close to that fine microfoam. Time-wise, it will probably take you about 15 to 25 seconds of those quick movements of frothing.
All right, Scott, now that you've got your nice microfoamed milk, you need to pour it into a pitcher.
After that, you can remove your plunger, and I always recommend that people have some sort of steaming pitcher or jug accessible to them.
Okay, I mean, that's actually pretty quick. I was expecting you're going to have to be kind of bashing away at this thing for a few minutes, but if she reckons she could do it in 25 seconds, that's probably as quick as I could steam a jug of milk anyway.
Are you now ready to go one step further with this? And, we're about to get a teensy bit more professional.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Let's go deeper.
Okay, well, the next step that Morgan talks about is using one of those, the small whizzing milk frothers.
Okay, so these little whizzers, my dad's got one actually, and I've seen him attempt to froth milk in it, and generally speaking, it looks a bloody mess, to be frank. I wouldn't be able to do latte art with anything like that. But if Morgan's got some tips on how to make this better, I'm all ears.
Yeah, well, Scott, it's truly all about the technique. First things first, put the pitcher on the counter.
Let it sit there. Let that be the component that doesn't move. Otherwise, it gets a little overwhelming. And then the steps for using the hand frother are pretty similar to what you do with a steam wand. I always recommend people hold their hand frother at kind of a 45-degree angle. So you're not dropping it down to the bottom. You kind of have it at a slight angle here. You will just put it into the milk just enough so that swirly little bit at the end is going to be just submerged. So you're not dunking it down to the bottom. You just have it nicely at the top. Because then when you turn it on, the movement that swirling motion creates will start to spin your milk. And when that happens, the spinning part will emerge and start to pull air in, which is going to, again, create that foam. So having it at that 45-degree angle, just barely under the surface, is going to be really the ideal for introducing air. Now, you're only going to do that for about, depending on how powerful your frother is, probably about 5 to 10 seconds, because you don't want to blast your milk. You just want a little bit of air in there. After that, then you will start to submerge it. So after you get about 5 to 10 seconds of air, then you're going to just push the hand frother down to the bottom. And all you're really doing is just spinning that milk around so you can then introduce that air that you have now sitting at the top, because you probably at this point have two separate textures. You're then going to want to just spin your milk so all that air on top transfers throughout the rest of your milk.
Okay. I mean, that's starting to make sense now, because in some ways, knowing what I know about using a proper steam wand, it's very similar. You're essentially, first you're introducing the air into the milk, and then you're trying to kind of redistribute that air in a very fine way. So I got to say, I haven't done it myself, but I can see why that would work.
And, there you have it, Scott. It's right there for less than 20 quid. You can do latte art in your kitchen.
Brilliant. Thank you, Morgan, for the tips.
But you know what? It was fascinating speaking to Morgan about this. But I have to admit, Scott, that when I was listening to her telling me about how you can do this with either the French press or the milk frother, I did think to myself, I could actually just use the hand whisker to do this, because I genuinely have a bunch of these things lying around in my cupboards. But Morgan definitely set me straight on that one. Is that possible to do that with latte art, or is Jules just going to whisk her own arm off at this point?
I think the issue you would mostly run into is by the time you've introduced enough air to get something close to a latte texture, I think your milk might be at room temperature, which I think is going to be the biggest issue you would run into. It reminds me very much of March of 2020. There was that huge trend of people making whipped coffee, where they were doing instant coffee and hot water, and then they would use a whisk to just whip it up until it kind of became this creamy, it was almost like a peanut butter texture with how thick they got it. But the side effect of that is everyone afterwards was being my arm's falling off, I'm so tired, all this stuff. So I worry that would also be the end result of using a whisk.
I think by now our dear listener might be wondering, what kind of milk shall I actually be using to actually get great microfoam and froth milk at home? And Morgan had some absolutely brilliant advice on that.
I am fully committed to barista milk. I will always choose barista milk over any other type of milk for pretty much anything I do nowadays, even if that's putting, milk in my cereal.
Okay.
Surface level, it may just look like marketing or branding being this is the barista's milk. And it's what does that mean? That doesn't actually mean anything to anyone. But what they have done is barista series milks are specifically formulated to pair with coffee, and they're also formulated to be able to have and hold that really silky texture that we look for in latte art. And how they do that is they're adding additional proteins, they're usually adding additional fats, and then additional sugars as well. First of all, to make sure the flavor profile of the milk is as complementary to coffee as possible. So it's not going to be super overpowering. It's just going to be kind of an enhancement tool. And then secondly, with those added proteins and fats, it allows a lot more heat and air to be introduced to the milk while the milk remains stable instead of, either splitting or, having really weird like air bubbles. It makes it so it's able to, it like ups the capacity of the milk, if that makes sense.
It is brilliant, especially if you're using it specifically for coffee. It is very, very, very good.
Well, it's something I'm definitely going to investigate, but there is actually one milk that Morgan says that we should completely avoid when it comes to trying to do microfoaming.
Oh, this might be a little controversial.
Oh, we love courting controversy on here. Go for it.
I would say rice milk is one that is very, very hard to work with.
Oh, wow.
Rice milk is super tricky. It tends to have a really thin texture. I've always kind of described it as being a little bit watery. Maybe that's just the ones that I've tried, but I've always struggled with it a bit. As far as flavor goes, one of the milks that I've worked with a lot that I think has a really tricky flavor that tends to overshadow a coffee is actually soy milk. And I know that's kind of the grandfather of all alternative milks. Like that used to be very much like the standard. Like that was the only alternative milk for so long. Yeah. But soy has a really distinct flavor that while it's very, very tasty, it is very distinct and can frequently overshadow, the components in a coffee that you might want to highlight.
I completely agree with Morgan on this. I mean, we did a whole feature on this a year or so ago where we took all of the different alternative milks. And I got to say, she's bang on the money. Rice milk was terrible. We've got this great milk now, and it's at 60 degrees. It's been frothed within an inch of its life. Beautiful, silky, gorgeous microfoam. But what are we going to do with it? We really need to speak to a real latte art champion and figure out how we're going to pour those stunning little patterns.
My name is Heidi Philip-Smith and I work at the London School of Coffee and I'm a latte art trainer and a barista trainer as well.
Okay, I think you're selling yourself a bit short there, Heidi.
Yes, sorry, yeah, I always do that. I am a 4-time UK Latte Art Finalist and I've competed in the World Latte Art Championships in 2017 as well and represented the UK.
So, Jules, I don't want this to turn into sort of like all the gear type thing, but we've got this beautiful microfoam milk and now we need to get it into these beautiful patterns, and we do need a couple of pieces of equipment to get us there.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Okay, so firstly, you're going to need like some nice shaped cups. I would always recommend to get egg-shaped size cups.
And when you say egg shape, you mean the bottom of the cup needs to be rounded rather than square?
Exactly, yeah.
So are you saying then that I can't pour latte art into my world's best dad mug?
Not just yet. It will be much easier to learn in like an egg-shaped cup.
Scott, why is that?
I think it's a little bit of like flow dynamics, man. But essentially...
Flow dynamics, man.
Essentially, the cup needs to be wide and shallow with a rounded bottom.
Would something like one of my small ice cream bowls be a good thing to use?
Maybe if you wanted to have, a Starbucks super grande type coffee, but I mean, essentially though, what you're talking about is yes, you want a cup which looks more like an ice cream bowl than something with dead straight sides and a dead flat bottom.
Okay, curvy is good.
Now, the next thing you need is a milk pitcher to actually pour out of. And I think Morgan also referenced this very briefly.
She did indeed.
But it's actually something quite specific that Heidi's going to talk about now.
So you just need a jug, which has a good shaped spout, which is about a thumb width. And it needs to have this really nice little tip on the end, sharp to the touch. And that tip is the most important part because that's what helps you control when you're pouring your latte out. If you don't have that tip on the end, it will just kind of drag your whole pattern and it won't make a nice clean line through it.
And where would you suggest that maybe our listener would buy their jugs from?
You're going to be so happy right now because it's not a specialist jug. You need to go to Nisbets and you need to get Olympia jugs because they're like the best basic jugs. They're like £8, £10. So absolute bargain.
Oh, okay.
And they do them in like different sizes. So you can get the 350 ml one and you can get a 600 ml one. So you should get both.
You know what? I'm loving the fact that being able to do this is still all quite affordable and accessible.
Now, Jules, Heidi is now going to give us a little bit of a step-by-step of how to create latte art. But the first rule is you need to steam your milk last.
Oh.
So basically, once you've steamed milk, it only has like a short amount of time until it starts to separate. So even if you've made that really amazing like microfoam creamy milk, if you were to just sit and leave it, it's just going to separate. So the foam will go to the top and all the liquid will go to the bottom. And then when you try and pour with that, all the liquid will basically come out and the foam will be left behind. So it's really, really important to make your espresso shot first, then steam your milk, and then straight away start pouring. It's literally a race against time.
Mate, this is something that I'm guilty of. I've done this when I've tried to steam milk at home. I've done it and then left it and carried on with doing my coffee. And then I wonder why this thing is just split into like just two completely different levels of like really bad foam at the top and then just tepid milk at the bottom.
And I understand it. You know, the thing is, if you make your espresso, that's done. And actually, a lot of the heat comes from the milk. So it doesn't actually matter if that espresso has gone cold or has gone tepid. It doesn't matter because all the heat's going to be brought back with the milk.
Right, noted.
So Heidi's now going to teach us, you know, how to pour latte art, but obviously we're doing this in an audio format and you can't see it. So you're going to have to use your imagination, Jules. So close your eyes, relax, enter the world of the latte art.
Basically, the first part of the pour is you're just mixing from a little bit of a height and you're mixing that espresso and the milk together because you want to basically try and get as much contrast as possible.
So you start with the pitcher about, 3 or 4 inches above the cup.
Yep.
And you get the espresso and the milk kind of spinning around so that there's a nice brown colour to it.
So mixing the base, once the cup's half full, you want to basically bring your jug closer to the espresso and speed up a little bit because obviously you need a bit more momentum to get the foam or the froth to come out. And then as it's starting to come out and as the cup's filling up, you want to slowly bring your jug back up. You want to come up higher and cut clean straight through the pattern.
See, this thing with height is fascinating because I know when I have attempted to do this at home, I just assumed I could put the jug next to the cup and just pour and just assume that the magic would start to happen that way. But just that variable of changing it and obviously the effect that it has with the coffee, even down to the colour and the contrast that Heidi talks about as well, is incredible.
Jules, think of it this way. You watch the Olympics and you watch the divers.
Yeah.
When they jump from the really high boards, they go down under the water, like a really long way. And if they jump from like the lower boards, they go into the water less deeply.
Yeah.
If you pour high and you, with a lot of, the milk's going to go in like quite quickly. It's going to hit the bottom of the cup. So start spinning, which is great. But when you want that milk to float on the top and make your latte art pattern, you need to start bringing the pitcher closer to the coffee because what's happening then is that it's not flying in so hard and hitting the bottom. It's actually laying on the top surface. And at the start of the process, you do want it to be high. You want to get that milk into the espresso and kind of mixing around and get a nice brown colour to it. But then you need to pull that jug closer to the coffee so the milk then starts to float nearer the top.
Now, I'm visualising myself doing this in my kitchen and maybe having a bit of what I would call a celebration pour where I'm trying to be clever and doing
Darling,
it. Darling,
this isn't Salt Bay, okay? We're not going super high here.
Yeah, super high. The celebration pour and doing all of that. But
what are those Spanish guys when they pour the wine and they do it from a series? Is that the Spanish guys? They're really, really long. They're really high. They introduce all the air to it and stuff. It's not that.
So that's not going to be me in my kitchen doing it that way. But what I'm thinking is that I want to give this a go, but I have the fear that I am going to waste so much milk trying to get this right.
Well, that's a really good point, Jules. And we don't want to waste milk like that. That's really not good for any form of sustainability. And so if you do have an espresso machine at home, this next little trick will be for you.
So basically, one of the things that we do is you can just get some cold water and put it in your jug, and you can add a tiny little bit of washing up liquid, and you can just basically just treat that as if it's like milk, and you can just practice steaming like that and get used to texturing it and getting it spinning in that vortex.
That's incredible. So I just need a drop of dishwasher detergent, which most people have in their kitchens, and I'll be able to use this and practice, and it steams like milk.
Absolutely. I mean, it's like magic. Okay, Jules, this is assuming our dear listener has an espresso machine at home. I spoke to Heidi and asked her, what are the sort of the right ways and the wrong ways to steam milk? And what would that sound like? And the other great thing is that you can listen out for this in cafes and get an idea of how they're doing it. And generally speaking, when you're using a home espresso machine, what is it that most people probably do get wrong?
So they either, it's normally two polar opposites. Either they stretch the milk so much and they texture it way too much, so then it's really, really frothy milk. And obviously you can't pour, you could probably pour a splodge with that, but you can't pour a nice shaped heart, because you've basically just overstretched the milk and it will just be very dry and foamy.
Okay, Jules, can you hear the sound that Heidi's making with the milk? There's too much air being introduced there.
It's making me think of a steam train. This is the first thing that I can hear. It sounds like and it's just that sounds odd.
It sounds really pillowy, which I know sounds a weird thing to say, but I've heard that sound way too many times in coffee shops. And when you hear that, I just know that I'm just going to get a big ball of candy floss sitting on top of my coffee. It's going to be really dry and get stuck on your nose probably. You'll look like Coco the Clown with a big blob of white foam sitting on your nose. Okay, Jules, so we've listened to that. Now, we're going to listen to Heidi do it again, but this time she's not going to put enough air in it. And this is what our producer James is obsessed with, and this is called the pig squeal.
Horrendous. That was pain in my ears hearing that, and I assume that's the pain in your heart when you feel that if you walk into a coffee shop, Scott, and you hear the pig squeal.
It is not good.
This is not the milk you were looking for.
And again, I've heard that so many times in coffee shops, and it's definitely one of my pet peeves. And if I hear that, I'm turning on my heel and walking out, because I know that I'm getting nothing but burnt, really insipid milk. And that's not what I want to pay for.
This is fascinating because we've listened to the sound of dry liquid, if that makes sense. So when it's just going to be too frothy and just bleh. Then we've had the charming pig squeal, where it's just going to be no.
Yeah, boiling milk with no air. Yeah.
So just being the Goldilocks of wanting to get the perfect one, what does perfectly still milk actually sound like?
Jules, what did you notice about that third one?
That it was smooth, and in comparison to the other two, that it was practically silent. I mean, obviously you could hear something going on with it, but it wasn't a particularly aggressive sounding steaming of milk. It just sounded calm and smooth and balanced.
I mean, that is absolutely it. If you can really hear them steaming the milk, it's a bad sign. If it's almost silent, if it's really, like you say, sounds controlled and smooth, that's a really good sign of someone that actually knows what they're doing. So Jules, I don't expect people to get this right straight away. There's a real sense, I remember myself, there was a real sense of satisfaction that first time I got the milk right. I poured it and I got a heart, and it looked like a heart. I think I even Instagrammed it. But
If you didn't Instagram it, Scott, it didn't happen. So
absolutely. But it is a journey. You're not going to get it right, and even today, I get it wrong. I steam it badly, or it just looks like a splodge. But hey, it's all good fun.
that was an incredible and yet very steamy session with you, Scott. But I think it might be time for us to now roll those credits. This podcast was produced by James Harper, the creator of the coffee podcast Filter Stories. He also wrote and plays the piano music.
Our editor is Romeo Ronald Lamora. If you like the show, then please subscribe on your podcast app. You can help others find the show by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. Just think, we can help all those people making terrible pig squealy milk in their own kitchen. Please help them, ease their pain by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts.
Now, if you want to follow Morgan, you can find her at Morgan Drinks Coffee on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube.
And if you'd like to follow Heidi, then you can do that at Heidi Philip-Smith. And she also teaches latte art at the London School of Coffee in West London.
Now, in our next episode, we are going to crack open the world of coffee blends.
Yes, and we are bringing you an incredible story about a multi-generational coffee roaster and what was considered good coffee back in the day.
Now, we're going to be taking you all the way to Nicaragua to discover the truth about single origin coffees.
Yeah, wake up, sheeple.
But until then, take care, and we will speak to you again in a couple of weeks.